Alright guys, we're going to go over a few watercolor techniques to help make sure that you've got everything the best it can be, and so that we don't turn your paints into straight mud. So before I start working, I'm going to get my brush wet, make sure it's clean, and then I'm going to add 2 drops of water. If you have a really small paintbrush, you might want 3. And I'm just really lightly wiping across the top of the paint. Now, I'm going to go paint my big circle blue. And you'll notice I'm going along the edges before I fill in that spot. Your watercolor should be transparent. It should not look like a marker or a crayon. If it starts getting too thick, add another drop of water. But remember, watercolor is intended to be like water, to be see-through, to be transparent. So it doesn't need to be something where it's scraped off and put on. Now, the other thing to watch out for is if your brush gets too dry. If it starts looking like little finger marks, then what's happened is you've got not enough water on your brush, and you just need to go and get some more water to come in and add to it. Now, a lot of people will ask, well, how do I keep the watercolors where I want them? Mine always seem to just bleed into each other and make a mess. The key there is to only paint wet next to dry if you want them to stay apart. If you want them to blend together, then you can paint wet next to wet. So for example, I want this to be green, this big circle right here. But if I paint that green right now, it might bleed into my blue circle. It might slowly go over the border. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint something that I know it is not touching anything wet. So for example, I could paint my circles. I think those are going to be this deep green. 1, 2, swish, 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 swish. Come and paint those. You'll notice I'm also keeping my bristles going one direction, almost like I was painting a cat or a dog. What you don't want to do is scrape it and scratch it. Your goal is to be smooth so that you're taking care of your brush and it lasts you a longer time. I'm also not scooping, I'm just dipping. Alright, and you know what? I do actually want this next circle to be this teal color. So I'm going to also get some of it painted, because it's not touching anything else wet right now. Okay, so if I wanted all my colors to be separate, then I'd stop now. I wouldn't add anything until I knew that I was going to have things that were separate and dry and ready to go. But I want to show you what it looks like when I do wet on wet. So for example, I could come and get a little bit of blue. I'm going to start out blue down at the bottom of this. And I'm going to be a little bit uneven in how I go about my painting. You'll notice that the blue looks a little bit more saturated, and that's because the water has been sitting on that watercolor longer. So it's had a longer time to make itself saturated. Alright, now when I go and paint the next color, I'm going to let it stretch on top of that first. And gradually it will get more blended as the water spreads out. Alright, so I've got the purple right now. I've got that blending in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and get the last color in there. And I can come and add that over the end where it is going past. And you can see how it's blending and creating almost like a galaxy effect. So wet on wet, only if you want it to do that. If you want it to be separate, it's got to be wet against dry. Alright, so now that we've got this, I'll wait before I paint the rest. I'll let them dry. I did want to show you what happens if you use crayons before you use your watercolors. So I've gone ahead and I've added crowns into this picture to give it some texture, to give it some depth. And now if I go in and paint with my purple, if I'm nice, light, and transparent, it will just glance off of the flowers' crown spots. And it'll leave for me a real nice, open feeling in the paint, but it will also have that depth of having shading done. And with crowns, you have a little bit more control. You're not so much worried about, oh, is this going to bleed? Is it going to go somewhere I don't want it to? You have a lot more control with crowns, so sometimes it's a really nice addition, especially for shading or if you want something to be a hard edge. Same goes for something like this. I just wanted some texture in my tree, so if I get a little bit of green going, and I come in and lightly go across it, then my green tree will look a little bit more multi-dimensional and like it's got some great texture in it. So there is the great trick of using crayons with your watercolors. Alright guys, let's see one more thing. If you end up getting a situation where, heaven forbid, you are painting or maybe brother or sister borrowed your watercolors and oh no, there's stuff in the other color. Ah! It's okay. While it is still wet, while you have still just used it, take a paper towel or a baby wipe and gently wipe across the top surface, and that's going to get that first surface layer of paint out so that you can keep it clean. Alright, it was great to see you guys. Take care.